Support for Trifles comes from the BSI Press. Manuscripts, collections of papers by international writers, and books covering a wide range of other Sherlockian topics. Find them online at bakerstreetirregulars.com. And by listeners like you, who choose to support us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Patreon.com/Trifles.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the box was cardboard, the detective was dying, and the bridge was Thor, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
Have you ever stopped to wonder why James Fillmore disappeared looking for his umbrella? Or just how parsley can manage to sink into the butter?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Bert Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 279, The Dates in the Red-Headed League. Hello there, and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we look into the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Wolder.
And Bert, are you ready for a really exciting date?
I am, but the problem is I have all of these figs that I brought in because apparently I completely misconstrued the nature of the condiments that were required for this discussion.
Well, we need to revisit this recording session around the holidays where you can bring us some figgy pudding and leave it right here.
Oh, I like that. That's a great idea.
Well, another great idea is if you would like to check out the show notes for this episode, they are available at ihose.co/trifles279, all lowercase. That'll take you directly to our website, which is SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. It'll take you directly to the notes for this episode. There you can find out more about the things that we're talking about here. You can also get in touch with us if you hit the email button. You can email us at trifles@ihearofsherlock.com. And you can support the show via Patreon for as little as $1 a month. You can help us do what we do, which includes research, materials acquisition, email hosting, sound file hosting, and website hosting, all the kind of things that go into a high-budget production like Trifles. And you can check it out there. And again, all of our Patreon supporters are eligible every month and every quarter for drawings that we do for free back issues of the Baker Street Journal and a free year's subscription to the Baker Street Journal. So thank you in advance. Well, this is the first week of the month, and that is traditionally, in Season 6, the week when we do a Mr. Sherlock Holmes the Theorist themed episode. We take a look at a piece of old Sherlockian scholarship, perhaps something that isn't readily available to people, and we review it. We kind of walk you through the arguments and help you understand what the author was trying to get at, and perhaps we offer our own assessment as well. In this case, we're looking at a seminal piece of information that comes from Dorothy Sayers called The Dates in the Red-Headed League. And Bert, I believe you found the first instance of this appearing.
Oh, I did, actually. Is this actually the first appearance in the colophon?
I believe it is.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah, there was a lovely... our listeners can find out more about the colophon. That's colophon, COLOPHON, which was a special publication for book collectors, basically, in a variety of series sort of from the 1930s to the 1940s. And it's noted for a couple of other reasons. Well, one is that Frederick Dorr Steele's memoir, essentially, his reminiscences about the golden age of illustration, 1890, 1900, with copies of drawings that people had given him and illustrations he made himself, appeared in an issue of the Colophon. But this is a different issue of the Colophon, and it's a very handsome book, and you can find these back issues on ABE Books. This is from June 1934, and as I mentioned, there were a couple of series of the Colophon in different ways. But basically, this was sold by subscription to about 2,000 people. So they never printed a great many of them, but it's really worth having if you fancy this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Beautifully produced, and this is part 17 of what they were calling the Colophon at that point, from June 1934. And what happened was people would write essays, and then different printers across the country would choose paper stock and typography and layout and send the signatures to a central place where they were then they were then bound as a hardcover book. And it's a charming thing. And Dorothy Sayers' The Dates in the Red-Headed League appeared in 1934.
Now, no spoilers, because I haven't read the first 16 parts of the Colophon yet.
I'll hold on. If you want, I'll hold on.
Well, the good news is, if you cannot locate the Colophon, Dorothy Sayers' essay has been reprinted in other works. There is, of course, Unpopular Opinions. I have a copy of the first cheap edition from I think this is 1946, I believe. That's when it was first printed. I have the second impression, the first cheap edition from March 1951, but it was originally published in Unpopular Opinions by Dorothy Sayers in 1946. And I also have a copy of James Edward Holroyd's 17 Steps to 221B, which I believe Otto Penzler made available from the Mysterious Press back in the 90s, and it was originally printed, by George Allen and Unwin in 1967. So there's a number of sources out there if you'd like to track down this essay yourself. But what it is a response or an observation in, again, 1934, which is when it appeared in the Colophon. This was only 2 years after H.W. Bell made the first attempt of any Sherlockian to do a chronology of all of the stories. That is, to put them in the order in which he thinks they occurred based on inter-story and intra-story descriptions, rather than simply listing them in the order in which they were published.
Yeah. Now, a good place to start here is, in fact, with H.W. Bell, because what we want to do on this episode of Trifles is sort of take you into Dorothy Sayers' argument here. And this is important for a couple of reasons. One is that Dorothy Sayers, just a very quick commercial about Dorothy Lee Sayers, Dorothy L. Sayers, created Lord Peter Wimsey, and those are a wonderful series of novels that, a great many Sherlockians also enjoy. I certainly do. But Dorothy Sayers, in 1912, was a graduate of, I'm just looking here for the school, Somerville College at Oxford, where she studied modern languages and medieval literature. And in fact, she was a scholarship. She'd received the Gilchrist Scholarship for Modern Languages to Somerville. That's in 1912. And so she's a real scholar, and later on in her life did some very, very interesting work in other fields. But the point here is that she really brings to bear a scholar's eye. And this is one of the earliest pieces, sort of a fundamental cornerstone of Sherlockian scholarship, in responding to H.W. Bell's conclusions about the date of the Red-Headed League. So let's start for a second, just with what she's responding to. In his book, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, the first chronology of the adventures, it's really a very brief assessment by Bell. And Bell says, Well, you know, the dates as recorded are obviously incorrect, and there are only 3 indications that can help us establish the actual day of Mr. Jabez Wilson's visit to Holmes. First of all, Watson was married, so that's one factor. 2, it was clearly October 1890, because there's a good deal of interior evidence when Watson is unusually declarative about the actual dates. And that's only because with Jabez Wilson's assignment and so on, naming actual dates was really important to carrying the story through. And it was a Saturday. And basically what Bell says here is, Watson is just misreading. He wrote a 4, but he read it as a 9. And I think the true dating of this story, he says, is Saturday, the 4th of October, 1890. So the action, says H.W. Bell, is from early afternoon of Saturday to the early hours of Sunday. And then he goes on to explain, other reasons. But basically, that's his conclusion.
Yeah, and the reason that it was in question is because when Watson arrived at Baker Street and Jabez Wilson was there and giving his account of the Red-Headed League, he mentioned having read the announcement in the Morning Chronicle of the Red-Headed League, announcing that it was formed. And this is, of course, the advertisement that caused so many gingers to head down to Pope's Court on Fleet Street to mob the offices of Duncan Ross in applying for the position. And of course, Jabez Wilson, who was the target in this con, was handily selected. But the Morning Chronicle was dated April 27th, 1890, and Dr. Watson says just 2 months ago. So here we have the dissolution notice of the Red-Headed League, which happens later in the story. October 9th, 1890, the Red-Headed League is dissolved. And this was just as Wilson was telling his story, he shared that note. So it's not like time passed in between him telling them about the beginning of the Red-Headed League and when it was dissolved. It was all happening in that one setting, that one sitting. So we're trying to square, well, how do you get from April to October when that's just 2 months ago? And interestingly, and I'm going to go outside of our investigation between Bell and Sayers here, and I'm going to go over to another chronologist for just a moment, and that is William Baring Gould. In the very opening of the story, the first annotation he notes, he says, one day, Holmes thrice gives us the day on which the adventure of the Red-Headed League took place. Today is Saturday. Today being Saturday rather complicates matters. Saturday would suit them better than any other day. And Mr. Merriweather says, it is the first Saturday night for 27 years I have not had my rubber, meaning his game of whist. But it's also noted that it was, I had called upon my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, one day, that'll be Saturday, in the autumn of last year. And again, we're talking about April from the Morning Chronicle. Well, it is unlikely that it occurs in late spring because Mr. Jabez Wilson wore, quote, a faded brown overcoat. It's unlikely that he would have been wearing such an overcoat in late April. Much more likely that he would have been wearing it in October. So just an interesting sidebar there.
Well, it's a terrific sidebar, and it's important to our discussion, which I believe we will likely continue after this word from our sponsor.
Yes, we're in the middle of one of those Mr. Sherlock Holmes the Theorist episodes of Trifles, where we're looking at a classic piece of Sherlockian scholarship. Well, where can you find classic Sherlockian scholarship? Well, there are a couple of places, and we can think of one of them right off the bat that's available right now. It's The Grand Game, Volume 2, which contains Sherlockian scholarship from a variety of sources, mostly the Baker Street Journal, from 1960 to 2010. Volume 2 is all that's left because Volume 1 was so popular, it sold out. We'll have more news on bringing Volume 1 back from the dead in future episodes, but for now, get on over to BakerStreetIrregulars.com and pick up your copy of Volume 2 of The Grand Game, covering the last half-century of Sherlockian scholarship. You won't find better work in a single volume anywhere else. Go to BakerStreetIrregulars.com and get The Grand Game Volume 2 today.
Okay, we were trying to figure out how to bridge April to October in just 2 months, and to kind of make his point, but to still leave it hanging out there. H.W. Bell says, Mr. Jabez Wilson declares that he saw the same advertisement when it appeared this day, 8 weeks, i.e. on Thursday, 14th August, 1890. Okay, so that's what he would say. So that 8 weeks ago would take us to the middle of August. Furthermore, he writes, it is to be remarked that Wilson was paid £4 every Saturday for 8 weeks. He says himself, quote, it cost them £32, end quote. But on the 8th Saturday, he found the office of the League closed and received no pay. This introduces a new complication, which probably is caused, like the others, by Watson's personal troubles. That's according to Bell. So he just ascribes it to Watson's quote-unquote personal troubles, which is a convenient out when you think about it.
Well, yes. But that is part of the charm and intensity and the value of this. I'm of two minds about this, because as we have this conversation, I can imagine, some of our friends, our colleagues, Bobcats, in particular, there's no subject that is less interesting to certain Sherlockians than chronology. I can see eyes rolling. But bear in mind, this is one of the adventures. So this appeared in print in August of 1891. And so the idea, when something appears in print in August of 1891, and Watson is making a statement, about the year prior, one day in autumn of last year, all of this is really very real. And here we are in the adventures, and you don't get too far into the case of the Red-Headed League before you sense something is going on that's wrong. This is, we know from Watson's writing in this case that the adventure happened between a Saturday and a Sunday, basically. And the day is fixed by the notice on the door of the League's premises, as Dorothy Sayers points out, as October 9th. But October 9th, 1890, was a Thursday, as we've just discussed. So what's going on here? And that's really what kicks all this off.
Yeah, and aside from Watson's personal issues, and you note that this was written, or at least published, in August of 1891, Watson was coming off of May of 1891. And we all know what happened in May of 1891. Of course, that was the final problem. Holmes going over the Reichenbach. So Watson could have been very troubled and kind of absent-minded as he was writing this up. And I think this could be where Sayers' explanation makes a lot of sense. She says, Mr. Bell, thinking that Dr. Watson may have misread his own figure 4 as a 9, selects October 4th. October 4th, of course, being a Saturday, so it would have worked. She says, I emphatically agree that this is the correct date, though I differ from Mr. Bell as to the precise way in which the mistake came about. In my opinion, the crucial points of the problem are A, the surprising error, April 27th, and B, the discrepancy about the money, neither of which anomalies is accounted for in Mr. Bell's commentary. In the following notes, I shall hope to show exactly how A, occurred, that is the surprising error of April 27th, and that B, the discrepancy about the money, was no error at all, and thus to establish the date by 2 independent and mutually supporting lines of reasoning. Now we're off to the races.
Well, yes, we are, and it's a little difficult to figure out exactly how to condense the rest of her analysis here, but we certainly are, as you say, off to the races, because she's begun poking, what will become increasingly larger holes in H.W. Bell's reasoning and conclusions.
Yeah, and basically she says the October 4th is most likely, since Watson's hardly likely to have mistaken a double figure 11 or 18 or 25 for a single figure 9. So transposing a 4 to a 9 is likely where our starting point would be. And then that the Morning Chronicle advertisement to show up at 7 Pope's Court was on a Monday, to show up on a Monday. So it would make sense that it was in the previous Saturday's issue of the paper. And that actually aligns to the 8 weeks as she measures it. But then she wonders why Spaulding, who lived on the premises with Mr. Wilson, didn't show him the paper at once if it was on the previous Saturday. The inference is that the advertisement actually appeared on the Monday. So she just chalks it up to careless wording in that case. But it's strongly supported by Watson's remark that the advertisement appeared just 2 months ago, which brings us back to Monday, August 4th.
Yeah. And then, Ms. Sayers takes us through that. We're told on the occasion, the events of Monday, the 4th of August, that Vincent Spaulding came down into the office. And this is part of her other exploration in this essay, which is exactly what is going on. What is this about Jabez Wilson's establishment? We're talking about putting up shutters, and there are 3 gilt balls, but where she's questioning a lot of these things. Mm-hmm. Where did Spaulding come down from? He didn't come down from the shop, because any place like that, the place of business would have been on the ground floor, unless we suppose the office is in the basement, which isn't reasonable. So if he came down, he probably came down from an upper floor. And if that was the case, he was idling while his employer worked. And was there a storeroom? And, then she digs into what Jabez Wilson is actually doing. And then, of course, we're back up to the scene of the shutters. Because when Spaulding shows Jabez Wilson the paper about the Red-Headed League, Spaulding was instructed to put up the shutters for the day and come right away. After which Wilson adds, so we shut the business up. And then, of course, Dorothy Sayers says, if there was no shop window, to what shutters does this refer? Why should any shutters be put up at all?
Yeah. Yeah, and she does spend a lot of time kind of talking about the shop and his hours he would have kept and the foot traffic around there. I mean, there's a lot of detail there. Yeah. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, in the unpopular opinions version of it, I think she truncated that argument and really just kind of stuck to looking at the dates. And then the thing for me, and we're going to have an image of this because there is visual documentation there from the manuscript, or at least from what it might look like in the manuscript, that I think Sayers does just a masterful job of looking at Watson's handwriting and ostensibly and convincingly saying how we could have gotten from April 27th to August, I guess it's August 4th. That's the interesting part. She says the only document we possess purporting to be in the handwriting of Dr. Watson is the sketch map which illustrates the adventure of the Priory School. And this is from 1904. It bears his name in block letters. The wording's clear, the letters on the whole neatly formed. Although 5 of the 10 small i's are undotted, the small r is loopless and tends to degenerate into a single stroke. The capital E resembles a C, and there are variations in the forms of capitals R and T. In any case, whoever executed this wording would, of course, be taking particular pains to make it legible and suitable, of course. It is probably very unlike the same person's hand when writing a normal, ordinary manuscript or notes. So, but is the writing necessarily that of Dr. Watson, she wonders, because it is possible that Watson himself redrew the sketches, and then there was other handwriting reproduced in the Reigate Squires, which of course relied upon handwriting analysis for Holmes to make his conclusion. Anyway, she says the probability that all of these elements where we see Watson's actual handwriting hurriedly executed on scraps of paper reached the blockmaker in a crumpled and dirty condition, unsuitable for reproduction, and were redrawn by him, aka the blockmaker, from the originals. Or since the same artist illustrated the whole series from the Adventures to the Return, he may have done some of the redrawing.
It's a wonderful analysis into, and a deep dive, a hugely deep, a scuba dive into the idea, could Watson's handwriting, could he really have mistaken a 4 from a 9? And, it just shows you that when you bring the right sort of scalpel of inquiry, questioning and asking and having this sort of dialogue on paper, what you can arrive into. But it's also interesting how she concludes this handwriting analysis. She says, there's been an omnibus edition of the Cases of Sherlock Holmes published in 1928. And when you look at this thing from the Priory School, the signature that had appeared earlier in other editions of John H. Watson is omitted from the map. And this can't be insignificant. Undoubtedly, Watson, she says, felt its presence to be misleading and had it excised from the block as a tacit admission that neither the sketch nor the writing was from his own hand.
Well, whether the handwriting error and the misreading of the script is because of the blockmaker or Watson or the editor, I suppose we'll never know. But in any case, it is certainly just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
I thought at first it was something clever, but now I see there's nothing in it after all.
Omne ignotum pro magnifico.